and welcome to Matchmove for Production by VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this video we'll be going through shot MM016. What we'll do first, we'll just play through this shot so we can see what we're going to track, then we'll open 3DEqualizer. So we've opened up 3DEqualizer, and you should have a UI like this. If you don't, if you go to Environments and select Basic, it should reset your UI to this basic workspace. So the first thing that we need to do is import our image sequence. So if you've purchased the MM016 image sequence from Gumroad, that's great because you can follow with me through this entire tutorial. If not, you can use your own data, but you might get stuck at some points, but all the information will be in there. So if we go to our sequence camera at the top left, and we go to live action footage on the right, select Browse, we can go to our MM016 insect shot, select our files, and if you see something like this, it's because your sequence view needs to be selected, so make sure that it's highlighted yellow. Click OK. And we brought on our image sequencing. We see it's kind of dark. It's because all these images have been transcoded into a linear color space. So if we go over to our right in our 8-bit color conversion and change our gamma to 2.2, it should bring it back to more of a neutral color. So at the moment we can't play through our timeline because we need to cache out our image sequence. So what I'll do, I'll save it first, click 3D4 and save, and I'll just make a directory here, and I'll call it the same name as the shot, so I always know that this is a file that corresponds to that play. Click OK, then I'll go to playback, export buffer compression file. This might take a while, so I'll fast forward through this. Cool, so that's exported out, so our next step would be to import it back in. And now we can play for our shot. Press spacebar, you can see what's going on. So if we look through this shot's actually a camera lock off. The camera's not moving. It's the hands that are moving. So this is going to be the first shot that we do of an object track. So we'll be solving the camera, and then we'll be solving the animation for the hand. So before we do that, we want to set up our lens. So if we go to lens, and if you open up your camera data file, you should get a bit of information on what camera it is. It's a Blackmagic 4K, and we do have the sensor size and what camera lens was used, and the focal length. So I always put in the film back height and leave the width as passive because you don't know what's happened with these plates, and always treat a plate as you don't know what's happened with it, but the data is helpful. So I'm going to change this to 0.88 millimeter. And see, it's changed it to the correct size anyway. Then we'll change our focal length to 35. Because we've got this and we know that, we need to bring in our... So now we've done that, we'll do our distortion. So go over to our cameras, right click, add new, reference camera. So now we've got a reference to camera. And if you double click on that, it will now activate this camera as the active camera. It's highlighted in yellow. So now if we go to browse, then go to the data, then you should have a lens grid folder if you have this. If you don't, you might have a lens grid that you've made of yourself. So if we select the 35mm lens grid and click OK, you can see it's brought in this lens grid now. And if we go to 8-bit color conversion again and change the gamma to 2.2 again, and now we'll come back to it because these have also been transcoded to a linear color space. So if we press F3, this will bring up our distortion menu, and we'll have this distortion grid in the middle. So if we select the top left and click and drag, and you see it's these little zebra lines, and let it snap. We want to make sure that they snap into these corners, and you want to do that for these first corners. So now I've got them snapped in this bottom left hand corner, top left and top right. Now I can go here where it says snap, then it will automatically snap the rest of the matrix to these points. So now we need to make this distortion matrix fill out the entire grid. So if we hold Control and press down, it will start extended downwards, and press Control up, it will start extending the column upwards. And the same with left, so hold Control left, and it will start extending all the way left, and hold Control right, and it will extend all right. So now, once you've completely filled the lens grid, you're done with it. All you have to do now is go up to the top where it says Calc, calculate lens distortion and camera geometry, and just select calculate lens parameters. You don't need to change anything else. And set parameters and close. So now if you click undistort, you can see the amount of distortion it's taking off. It's not very much. So we're now done with that lens distortion. So now if we go back to our camera at the top left, double click on that. And now we can see the distortion's been transferred over to our plate. So, as for this shot, we have pretty much all the data we need. So, we'll do our camera lineup first. So, if we go to our point group, 3D models, right click and add new, and import OBJ folder, OBJ file. And if you go to set geo, you'll have a hand set geo, and click OK. So now press F5, and you might not see anything, so if you click center models, you can see a hand has sort of been imported in its front and center. So if you hold shift and right click, you can sort of translate your camera in close to it. And hold shift and left click, and you can rotate around. I'm going to hold shift and right click, because I know this is my index finger, and I'll just try and get it fairly close with just holding the shift right click and the shift middle mouse button and the shift left to sort of rotate it. And we'll just put it in a ballpark sort of area. Then what we'll do, I'll store that pose just because it's nice to save it just in case it goes crazy. So now I need to line it up a little bit better. So what I'll do, if I select extract vertex, then hold control and left click. If I click and drag, I now have control over this point here now. And if I hold alt and left click and deselect it, and if I select extract vertex again and hold control left click, I can make another one. And you can see it's starting to rotate it a little bit. It's not doing what I want, so I'll just leave that one there and I'll make another one. So if I select extract vertex, hold control left click, I can now pull this one down. Now I can pull the other one, and I'll start adjusting some of these, try and get this sort of outline. It's probably not going to be an exactly perfect fit, but it should be quite close. So we're just going to use these line up points to line it up. So anyway we want to adjust, just make another one. So select extract vertex, hold control and left click. And we want to get the line up as tight as possible. Because if we have some sort of insect walking along our finger, a ladybird or something, we want it working really well. So I think that's pretty close. You can always adjust the geometry if it's slightly off in areas if you're having to warp. But we've got the main shape of it correct. In fact, actually, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you can sort of almost see a little bit of the finger. So we'll actually pull that down as well, so that's covered as well. So every little bit helps. Cool. So looking at that, we've got a pretty good lineup. Quite happy with that. So if I store that pose, that's now locked in for now, but be careful not to click remove pose, it's really easy to do. So now if we go to F2, because I know this is a lock off, there's no movement on the camera, I'm going to treat this as a locked off camera, because it is. So I don't actually need to track any points, I just need to lock this position in, because at the moment I can't solve for the camera position with just line up points. I need tracking points. So if I hold control and left click, but don't track it, in fact, if I delete that, sorry, yeah, if I hold Control and create a tracking point, and Control create a tracking point, Control create a tracking point, and just, you don't need loads because it's just going to be lock off. Then select them all, press F5, then either press P or, in fact, don't press P because you probably haven't got the shortcut set up. So select all your points, go edit, project points on models. So now that will project all your points onto your model. So now if you press Alt C, it's locked the camera in that position. We don't need to track it because we know it's a locked off camera. So now we can delete these lineup points. Let's add more. So if we go to F5, select those 2 points, edit, project onto the points, solve again. Because you need a minimum of 6 points for it to work. So if we right click add new point set, we'll call it SF for our single frame lineup, but this is going to be our camera. So if we bring this in here, we've now got that for SF for our single frame. And now our camera is done. Our next thing that we actually need to track the hands. So what we do with this, we actually, let's save it first. So we'll save project. And I'll just call 2. Save it again, sorry. Cool. So what we need to do now, we need to make a separate point group. So if we right click on our point groups, add new point group, and now we can double click on that, but we still see the hand. So if we go back to our first point group and hide this hand, because this is the hand for the camera. So if we hide that one, and it's very important that you don't solve yet. You don't press Alt C, otherwise you'll have to make a new point group. Because now, if you don't solve, you can click on your 3D models, right click, add new, import OBJ file, set geo, bring in your hand set geo, click OK. Now it's come in the exact same place. If you had solved it, this point group would reset itself back to 0, and then you'd have lost your lineup and have to do it again, or create another point group. So what we'll do, we'll just store the pose now we've locked that in place. And if we press F2, we can go back to the first frame, and we can actually start tracking some stuff now. So we're tracking on the second point group, which is our object. It will automatically change to an object group. So I want to pick points on this hand that are quite easy trackable. Gauge marker, center 2D, track. It's tracked quite nicely. So Control left click to make another tracking marker. Makes one a little bit big, so there's not a huge amount of detail. Gauge marker and track. And the bigger the tracking marker you make, the slower the track will be. So because there's not a ton, it looks like there's a lot of detail, but there's actually a lot of very similar detail which may cause it to jump and pop out of place and give you kind of bad tracks. So what we can do, we can actually go to our Windows and Image Controls window, and it will open this. So once that's finished tracking, so if we look through, we can see it's kind of jumping a bit. So let's delete that. we go to our image control windows, let's reset everything. If you turn your image, enable them at the top, nothing will happen. And then you need to enable your color controls. So you've got lots of things you can play with, but generally you'll get the most just from your contrast and your gamma. You can see how much more detail is sort of pulled out. So now if we create a new marker with Control left click, select that same point, gauge it and track, that will get a much better track from it. You can see it's picked up a lot more detail for the hands. See how that's tracked much nicer. So we'll just pick some details around here. Might have to pick quite large tracking boxes because it's quite a few. It's quite a lot of similar patterns. But let's see like the redness in the hand here. Decent tracks. If we go over here, got some pretty good detail here that we can track. Oh, let's delete that. Let's make sure that we're at the start of the end. We can change the direction of the tracking markers, but it's just easier to start the first frame with the last frame. So we'll try and get as much as we can. Obviously, the larger the tracking marker, the longer it will take. You can see that the change in the image has picked up slight bits of dust on the lens. Some more over here. Let's do one more. Cool, so we've got a fair few tracks now. So if you press F5, go back to our frame 15 where we lined up, and if you've accidentally moved it, you can go back to recall pose. That's broken it. Okay, so we'll have to widen that. Okay, so if we center our models, line up again. So if we turn our image control windows off, sometimes for some reason it didn't save the pose there, but we can quickly line it up again. So if we create an extract a vertex, hold Control and left click. Extract vertex, Control left click. Just another quick lineup. So now we're adjusting the object, not the camera. So I'm just going to extract vertex with Control left click. Bring that back in. You can see these sort of ridges align with the creases in the hand. So we want to try and get this as close as possible. So with everything, as soon as your lineups, the most important things are your lineups. If you get them good, most of your tracks will be pretty good. This is quite a low res hand, so it's probably not all the detail. So what we'll do, now we've got our lineup again, we'll select all our points, edit, project points on 3D models, and you see it says 8 of 9, so we're going to have to zoom in on the one that's not projected and project again. Some funny thing with the clipping plane. So now we've projected that all on. If we press Alt-C and use result, see our deviation browsers. It's not too bad, it's not great, but it's going to be a little bit different because we're doing an object track. So if we play through, we can see it's working really well. We can assume that probably some of these are projected in slightly different spaces. So if we show point deviation curves active, we can change some of them to approximate. So if we right click on it, modify, survey, approximately surveyed, and right click, Alt C, it's probably not going to make much of a difference. So what we can do is also do a focal length adjustment to sort of finesse it. So I think that's, if I press play now, I think if you had anything walking across that finger now, it would be sticking quite nicely. Even though because this is our object track graph, it's going to be, it's not going to be as low as our camera one sometimes, but that's pretty good for an object track. So if we go to our lens, and we'll go to our focal length and change it to adjust. Then you go to Windows, Parameter Adjustment window. We can change it to adaptive or click adjust. And it's not really done anything, which is fine. We can look at our points, click on Center 3D, because Center 3D is the most important thing, because that's pretty much, it reveals all. And you can see it's sticking really well. If we go to F6, we can see our hand here. You can see we've got multiple cameras in here now. We've got our lens camera and our animated camera, our locked off camera. If we press play now, we can see now that we've got the animation on the hand, and that's a object track the hand. So we're pretty much done now in 3D. So you might want to save. So file 3D4, save project as. OK. Overwrite. So now we need to export our camera. So 3D4, file export. So we go to camera, double check that it's 1001. 3D4, export mine. 1001. And what we can do, because it's quite a low res hand, we can export all models as well, and that will give us the lineup. So if we go and export our camera out, call it insect VG01 V01 cam V01, click OK, and export that. So now we need to export our lens distortion for our compass. So if we go File, Export, 3D for lens distortion node, click on file name, and we'll call it the same thing. Insert VGO1, VO1, nuke LD node, VO1, and click OK. So now we've exported our camera and our distortion node. We now need to render our undistorted plates. So if we go to 3D4 and run Warp 4, you should have this window open. So we can switch between our warp footage and our preview footage. Makes it undistorting it a little bit. So that's just a preview, it doesn't make a difference of what renders out. Let's change it here. So if we go to save footage on the right, click browse, and I'll go to where I've saved all my data. So we're all 16 insert. And I'll make a new directory. I'll call it UDP. And I'll call this insert VGO1 VO1 UDP dot 4 hashes dot EXR. The 4 hashes signify we're rendering an image sequence. Now I'll change the scale to 50% so it's not as heavy in our Maya. And then I'll click render. So then a little green frame should start popping up here. And I'll probably fast forward through this because it's going to take a while. Cool, so that's done now. So if we go File, Exit, we're now done in 3D now. Our next step would bring it to Maya and prepare our hand animation and our camera scenes. So if you guys enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.